آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. To proceed. Today we'll talk about Babu Shurut fi Nikah, or the chapter on conditions in marriage or prenuptial agreements. And Imam Qudamah rahimahullah says here in his book Umdat al-Fiqh, إذا اشترطت المرأة دارها أو بلدها أو ألا يتزوج عليها أو ألا يتسرى فلها شرطها وإن لم يفي به فلها فسخ النكاح لقول رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن حق الشروط أن توفوا به ما استحللتم به الفروج. If the woman stipulates in the marriage contract that she will not be removed from her residence or town, or that he may not have a co-wife or a concubine, she is entitled to her condition. If he does not honor it, she is entitled to annulment of the marriage, because the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, the conditions that most deserve to be fulfilled are those through which sexual intercourse becomes permissible for you. Now, so what the Sheikh will go through here is basically what he started with is valid prenuptial agreements, valid conditions. These are the shurut for nikah, and these shurut have to take place prior to the contract. People cannot stipulate conditions after the contract. People can only stipulate these conditions prior to the contract. So those who are married, you can't stipulate those conditions. Those who are not, I would tell you honestly, a marriage that starts with too many conditions is basically like a contractual agreement, not really a marriage. It just loses the sort of it loses the tenderness, it loses the moisture, it becomes so dry. Because if you have a marriage with like a prenuptial agreement and check boxes, that's even, and I'm not saying, I'm not completely condemning this, but for the past several years, they have been asking us at Amja to make a sort of a marriage contract with all the prenuptial agreements and check boxes so that people could say, yes, this. And I'm not saying that it is particularly, that people we're even considering to do this, but the problem here is when the marriage starts like this, it loses so much, it loses its spirit. The spirit is like a union between two people who are in love and who want to establish a union of spirits, a union of ruhayn ma'an, not a contractual agreement between two agents. It's just like, and the more you add to those prenuptial agreements and the more conditions you add, the more it becomes more contractual and less emotional, sentimental, spiritual. Anyway, but there are certain conditions that we will explain, and some of them are valid, some of them are invalid. So when it comes to the conditions in marriage, there are and certainly if like there is one thing that means a lot to you and you want to make it a condition, that's fine too. We're not condemning the concept of prenuptial agreements to begin with, but we're talking about excessiveness in the practice of prenuptial agreements. The Sheikh here will talk about valid and invalid conditions, and in general, conditions are divided, particularly in the Hanbali madhab, because keep in mind that the Hanafis will never invalidate the marriage because of an invalid condition. They will invalidate the invalid condition and they will recognize the marriage. They will validate the marriage, invalidate the invalid condition. That's the Hanafis. The Hanbalis are different. What the Hanbalis do is that they divide the conditions into valid conditions and invalid conditions. And the invalid conditions will invalidate the contract or not. So there are invalid conditions that will invalidate the contract, and there are invalid conditions that will not invalidate the contract. So if I have a valid condition, what does that mean? And then we will go back to the Sheikh and we will read the rest of what he had to say. But if you have valid conditions, what does that mean? She tells you, I'm not leaving New Jersey. In the prenuptial agreement, what does that mean? What if you will have to go to Missouri at one point? You will not be obligated, although according to Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said that you're obligated to honor the condition within your means, within your capacity. But the authorized position in the madhab is that you're not obligated to honor it, you're recommended to honor it. But she is entitled to annulment if you fail to honor it. Okay? So some people said that you're obligated to honor the condition. Some people said that you're recommended to honor the condition. But all people in the Hanbali madhab agreed that with these valid conditions, and in the other madhab, wherever they consider the conditions valid, but the Hanbali madhab is the sort of most pro-feminine madhab here when it comes to the conditions, because they allow so many conditions. The idea here is, in all cases, in all scenarios, if you fail to honor the prenuptial agreements, she will be entitled to fasq or annulment of the marriage. Are you required to honor the conditions? You're recommended, and some people said you're required. Okay, so these are the valid conditions, and we will come to discuss them. And then the invalid conditions. The invalid conditions will be two different types. There are invalid conditions that compromise the essence of marriage. Compromise the essence of marriage, the quiddity, the essence of marriage. And those conditions will invalidate the contract itself. There are invalid conditions that do not compromise the essence of marriage. They will not invalidate the contract. The contract will stand and the condition will be invalidated by a judge, a ruler, a hakim, an arbitrator. They'll just be invalidated. Okay, so the Sheikh starts, so we have three different types of conditions, right? According to the Hanbalis. The Hanafis will have what? Two. Valid and invalid. The invalid never invalidates. The condition will be invalidated, but the contract will stand. Okay. The Sheikh here started by the valid conditions. And he says, if the woman stipulates in the marriage contract that she will not be removed from her residence or town, or that he may not have a co-wife or concubine, she is entitled to her condition. If he does not honor it, she is entitled to annulment of the marriage, because the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said the conditions that most deserve to be fulfilled are those through which sexual intercourse becomes permissible for you. And the Prophet, so he said relocation. Well, this is one example he gave, and that is relocation from her home. She says, or the neighborhood, or even the very house. I am not leaving my parents. I'm going to be here in this home with my parents. And you can accept it or reject it. It's up to you. But I'm not leaving this house, and I'm not leaving this town, or I'm not leaving this state. So relocation. She's entitled. This is a valid condition. The concept here in the valid conditions in the Hanbali madhabs is that it has a there is an interest in that condition. There is a benefit that will ensue from this condition for one of the two contractors, and if that is the case, then it is in the interest of the contract. If it is in the interest of one of the two contractors, it is in the interest of the contract, and that is why they validate them. Is there a valid interest for a woman to stay in her whatever residence, town, country, whatever? Yes, there is a valid interest. So they validate this condition. Co-wife, that is the big disagreement between the Hanafis, between the Hanbalis and everybody else. All of them will not recognize this condition. She says to him, like, you don't marry another woman. Hanafis, Malikis, and Shafi'is will not recognize this. Why would they not recognize this? Because there is a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim from Aisha radiallahu anha where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, كل شرط ليس في كتاب الله فهو باطل وإن كان مئة شرط. And then every condition that is not in the book of Allah is invalid, even if it is 100 conditions. They would all be invalidated if they are not in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What did the Hanbalis say here? The Hanbalis said that this does not mean that the condition has to be written in the book of Allah. It means that it is not counter to the book of Allah. The condition must not be counter to the teachings of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the rulings in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Jumhur also said, المسلمون على شروطهم إلا شرطا أحل حراما أو حرم حلالا. Tirmidhi reported this from Amr ibn Auf, and this is an important hadith because it is an important hadith in all of the abwab of al-mu'amalat, all of the chapters of transactions, an extremely important hadith. Tirmidhi from Amr ibn Auf, والمسلمون على شروطهم إلا شرطا أحل حراما أو حرم حلالا. Muslims abide by their conditions. That's what the hadith says. Muslims abide by their conditions except a condition that makes halal that which is haram, or haram that which is halal. The Jumhur said when she demands that he does not take a co-wife, she is making halal haram. She's making something that's halal for him, haram for him. The Hanbali said no, she's not. She's only restricting his power to marry another woman. She's not saying that it is haram, she's just restricting his liberty to marry another woman. If he wants to marry another woman, he can go ahead and divorce her and marry the other woman. But she is telling him, as long as we are together, you don't marry another woman. If you marry another woman, I am entitled to annulment of the marriage. So that is what how the Hanbalis answered. If you want to add to these conditions, any condition that would be in the interest of one of the two parties of the contract and will not violate the essence of the marriage and will not make haram halal or halal haram, will be added here. So if she demands that she finishes college, for instance, that would be a condition that should be honored. That is a valid condition. Also, if she demands that she would work after marriage, given that the work does not compromise Islamic values and so on, it's like a decent job, etc. Then that is a condition that should be honored also. So those are all conditions that should be honored because they do not violate the essence of marriage, and they are of some benefit for one of the two parties, whether it is the man or the woman. Now, these are the valid conditions. Let us move on to the invalid conditions. And when it comes to the invalid conditions, the Shaykh would mention in this chapter only the invalid conditions that will invalidate the marriage. And these are three conditions that he will mention that would invalidate the marriage. These are invalid and they invalidate the marriage. That is نكاح الشغار والمتعة والتحليل. نكاح الشغار والمتعة والتحليل. He starts by المتعة, which is temporary marriage. Mut'a comes from enjoyment, or but it means temporary marriage. And then he moves to shigar, right? That's swap marriage. And then he moves to tahleel, which is tahleel marriage. And that is to make the first wife permissible after a third divorce, to marry a woman just in order to make her permissible for her first husband after the third divorce. Because we know that after the third divorce, a woman cannot go back to the first husband unless she gets married. And certainly the intent of the legislation here was not basically to do this trickery. The intent of the legislation was to say to them, you guys are not good for each other. Try, start a new life with somebody else. Don't get stuck here. If you got divorced 3 times already, you're not good for each other. You're not compatible. Just move on. But anyway, so these are the 3 different types that will invalidate the marriage. Is there a third type? What if she asks him? What if she says that let's get married on condition that we never have sex, intimacy? Does that invalidate the marriage? Well, so this is a big controversy. So if she says to him, we'll get married, but we never have intimacy, does she mean by this, or are they saying, or are they agreeing on a marriage without حل الاستمتاع, without basically intimacy or being halal between them? If that is the intent, that intimacy is not halal between us, we're just marrying, but the hurma will stand, then that compromises the very essence of the marriage by agreement, and that marriage is invalid. Okay, so she did not mean this. They did not agree on that. They just agree that although it is halal, we're just not going to do it. It is a celibate marriage. We're not going to do it. Then in this case, there is a disagreement. The Shafi'i said it's invalid, and that's a position in the Hanbali madhab that I personally so far uphold. Although it is not the authorized view in the Hanbali madhab, because this authorized view in the Hanbali madhab seems to be more in line with the Hanafis and the Malikis, that this marriage will stand. And the condition will be invalidated, but the marriage will stand. But why do I choose this, and why do I consider it stronger? And there are many Hanbalis who consider it stronger. There is a disagreement within the Hanbali madhab whether this will invalidate the marriage or not. But the mu'tamad, or the authorized position in the Hanbali madhab, based on the latter scholars, does not mean that this is the stronger in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It just means it's a technicality within the madhab. It is not about the stronger position in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the reason why I felt that the Shafi'i position here, which is one of the 2 Hanbali positions, is stronger and the marriage should be invalid, is that she's not really agreeing to marriage. I mean, what is marriage? عقد على حل الاستمتاع. The definition of marriage, this is a contract that would allow mutual enjoyment of each other, like sort of would allow for intimacy and if the definition of marriage is being violated here, if the condition compromises the definition of marriage, then but keep in mind that Ibn Hajar al-Haytami mentioned something interesting here, and I don't see that distinction is being made in other books, but Ibn Hajar al-Haytami said if there is sort of something to warrant the condition, if there is a mana, like let us say she has like a disease or something, or she can't do it, she has a heart condition, he has a heart condition, whatever, and they just can't do it, then in this case it will be valid, but otherwise it would not. And that actually is a nice distinction here between two different types, and it does make sense. Anyway.
Clarification: is it the other madhahib are giving that concession because of the certain situations that you just mentioned?
No, the other madhahib, they just said that this would not invalidate the marriage. But the problem when it does not invalidate the marriage, then like she got deceived into it. Like if she came into the marriage with the condition that there would be no intimacy, and then we tell her the condition is invalid, the marriage stands, the condition is invalid, that's a problem for her, I guess, like a big problem. So anyway, but then the Shaykh will start to talk about these three different types of things that would invalidate the marriage. But before I go over the three things the three marriages that are invalid according to the Shaykh, that the Shaykh will talk about here, let me talk about these things that will not invalidate the marriage. The conditions are invalid, but they will not invalidate the marriage. One example on this is to basically demand, or for him, most of these conditions that will not invalidate the marriage, but the conditions will be invalidated, are conditions that are usually made by the husband. So let us say that she will demand, or let's say that, it could be from the wife also. Let's say that she will demand that there would be no intimacy at night, only during the day, or something of that nature. The condition itself will be invalidated, but it does not invalidate the marriage. If he demanded that she spends on him, or that he does not spend on her, the condition would be invalidated, will not stand, but the marriage will stand. If he demands that he does not give her sort of an equal share of the nights, if she's a co-wife and he's married to others, the condition will not stand, the marriage will stand. The condition will be invalidated, the marriage will be invalidated. But these conditions that will be invalidated, can they be perpetually validated by them, practically speaking? Like if they agree, what is Zawaj al-Misyar? It is basically when they agree that she will get less, she will get like one day a month or something, or weekends or so, like something of that nature. If they perpetually continue to agree, mutually agree on this, does it stand? Yes, because al-haqq baynahum, it's between them, so if they mutually agree, they mutually agree. If she says yes, and then she takes it back later, will the hakim invalidate the condition? Yes, the hakim would invalidate the condition. So if she says yes, I'm okay with weekends, and then after they get married, she says no, I want my every other night or whatever it is, and they go to the judge, the hakim would invalidate the condition. He will say she's entitled to every other night. Okay. So these are different examples of conditions that will not be, when it comes to these conditions, the Hanafis also added one condition that is particularly interesting, which is that she can demand that she will have the right to separation at any time. And if she demands this in her ijab, in her offer, and he accepts it in his acceptance, in his qabul, it will stand. She will have the right to separation. She will have the right to divorce anytime. That's according to the Hanafis only, not the rest of the mazahib. Now, you guys are interested in this?
What does that mean?
Created so much interest on this. She's just demanding that she can get a divorce anytime she wants.
Or she just walks away, or how does it work?
Yeah. Like she will not walks away, but she is entitled to divorce anytime she wants. Yeah. So then the Sheikh says, ونهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن نكاح المتعة وهو أن يتزوجها إلى أجل معلوم وإن شرط أن يطلقها في وقت بعينه لم يصح لذلك. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade the mut'a marriage, which means that a man marries a woman for a certain specified period. Also, if he stipulates that he will divorce her at a certain time, it is not valid. It is not valid. So nikah al-mut'a is a big controversy because it's not a controversy within Ahl Sunnah, but it's often mentioned because the Shia recognize nikah al-mut'a as a valid type of nikah. And there are some hadith reported by Sunnis that they cite in support of their position. And these hadith will belong to two categories of hadith. A hadith that will show that nikah al-mut'a was valid at certain times during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and we all agree. But then that should not really compromise the definitiveness of the ruling, because there are many things that were okay. People were drinking wine, all the time during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the prohibition of wine was gradual, just like steps. So that does not really, it's not really a good proof against the definitiveness of the prohibition of temporary marriages. There are many hadiths that talk about this ruling abrogating the earlier permissibility. And then the other genre of a hadith, which is, not a genre, but the other hadith that they use also are a hadith where some of the Sahaba were not aware of the prohibition after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And that also does not actually cause a problem for us at all, because there are Sahaba that were not aware of many things after the Prophet ﷺ died. So yes, because not every time the Prophet ﷺ taught something new or gave them new instructions, he gathered everybody, like in Hajjat al-Wada' and 100,000 people and told them, and so things did actually, and that's where like a lot of disagreements take place. Because people were not aware, some of the Sahaba were not aware of some prohibition or some injunction that the Prophet ﷺ relayed to the people before his death ﷺ. So nikah al-mut'a, the definitiveness of nikah al-mut'a for us Sunni Muslims is not subject to discussion or debate. It is impermissible. It violates the very essence of the permanency of this and the stability of the family institution. If you will have families that are temporary, that are transient, that is not family life. Families are meant to be permanent, But in Islam, divorce is permissible because sometimes it will be in the best interest of the two parties that they separate, because they are so incompatible that life between them is just unsustainable. will be a source of grief for both of them. So, but does the permissibility of divorce in Islam mean that this union is not intended to be permanent? No, it is intended to be permanent, but if it fails, then Islam does recognize that it could fail and gives an exit for the two parties out of this. And that exit, oftentimes, that exit is disliked, detested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the default for that exit, according to the Hanafis and the choice of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, is what? Prohibition, not permissibility. Al-asl al-hazr, because of the darar or the harm that will befall the wife or the children. So al-asl al-hazr, unless there is a valid cause for the divorce. Then the other thing about nikah al-mut'ah here, he also says that if he specifies a certain time for divorce, that is also mut'ah, because it is temporary marriage. It is not a permanent marriage. But the other thing for nikah al-mut'ah is does the nikah b'niyat al-talaq, and nikah with the intent of divorce, marriage with the intent of divorce, but that intent is not verbalized. Like someone gets married and he intends to divorce after a couple of years. Someone, for instance, goes to study in Russia and he's doing a PhD in Russia. He says to himself, I will marry as long as I'm there to protect myself and this and that. And then when I leave, when I finish my PhD and go back home, I'll divorce her. Is that okay? It's not okay. Well, I believe it's not okay, but let's talk about the disagreement here among the scholars about this. So, Ibn Qudamah in al-Mughni and al-Nawawi in al-Majmu' mentioned that this is okay according to the vast majority of scholars. Because what they looked at is the pillars and the conditions of the marriage. The marriage now, this contract now, the pillars and conditions, his intent does not basically violate the pillars and the conditions of the marriage. There is ijab, there is qabul, and there is no agreement on a period. There is no specified period in the contract itself. So they looked at the contract and they validated the contract. They looked at the contract and validated the contract. The correct position, the authorized position in the Hanbali madhab is that it is not valid. The authorized position in the Hanbali madhab is that this marriage is not valid, and his intent will violate the essence of marriage, which is about permanency. That is only in the Hanbali madhab, by the way. Because the others will continue to look at the contract and validate the contract because the contract is fine. But the Hanbali said this marriage is not valid for him. He will not be married. But she will be, it's not a marriage. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not hold her accountable for sure because she doesn't know his intent. But he will be punished. She will not.
So it will not count as marriage for him?
No, according to the Hanbali madhab, yes. Yeah. But not according to others. So the idea here is the reason why I believe that the Hanbali madhab is stronger here is twofold. One, I'm Hanbali. The second one is because أَتَرْضَاهُ لِأُمِّكَ أَتَرْضَاهُ لِأُخْتِكَ. The same thing that the Prophet ﷺ said about zina. Would you want this for your mother? Would you want this for your sister? Would you accept this for your mother? Would you accept for your sister, that someone, proposes to her and he intends to divorce her? You wouldn't accept it, so you should not accept it for other people's sisters as well. And so on. So how do you get out of this? You get married, and because marriage itself, there is a way out. If she does not, if you don't turn out to be compatible, you divorce. If you turned out to be compatible, you keep her. That's it. That's just as easy as that. But you don't get married with the intent that you have a certain time after which you will divorce. You just get married for now, and if things do not work out and you're not compatible, there is a way out. And if you are compatible, then you don't divorce her just because you finished your PhD. Yes?
Don't the Hanabila, they don't differ. So I know they call it Binayyat al-Talaq, but the Hanabila place it with the Mut'a, right?
The Hanabila can put it under Mut'a.
Right, or Mut'a, it's the same thing, because they don't differentiate. Because they say it's either kind of Binayyati, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, the Hanabila will place it under Mut'a.
But others will call it Binayyat al-Talaq. They'll separate it.
Yes, but in general, it is, you can call it Binayyat al-Talaq and then add it, you consider it a subcategory of Mut'a.
I'm talking about the other schools, because I just know how they categorize it. That's the other schools of thought, how do they categorize it?
But Ibn Qudamah says in Mughni Binayyat al-Talaq. So and he mentions the disagreement. He would not mention the disagreement. He would not talk about. Ibn Qudamah even considers in Mughni, he says that عامة العلماء قالوا بجواز. So it is not synonymous with mut'a. We put it under mut'a. Hanbalis put it under mut'a, but it is not synonymous with mut'a. Yeah. It is a subcategory of mut'a. It is treated like mut'a. Hanbalis treat this marriage as a mut'a marriage, as a subcategory of mut'a. Then the Shaykh said, وَنَهَى عَنِ الشِّغَارِ وَهُوَ أَنْ يُزَوِّجَ الرَّجُلُ ابْنَتَهُ عَلَى أَنْ يُزَوِّجَهُ ابْنَتَهُ وَلَا صَدَاقَ بَيْنَهُمَا. And he forbade, that's the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, shighar, swap marriage, which is for a man to marry his daughter off to another man in exchange for the latter marrying his daughter off to the first man without a sadaq for either one. Without a sadaq for either one. So swap marriage is, the Prophet ﷺ said, or it could be also the narrator, أن يقول الرجل للرجل زوجني بنتك على أن أزوجك بابنتي أو زوجني أختك على أن أزوجك أختي. For a man to say to another man, give me your daughter in marriage in exchange for with condition or on condition that I give you mine in marriage as well, or your sister and sister swap, and that is an invalid marriage. That is an invalid marriage. Now, what is the effective cause here? What is the illah of the invalidity of this marriage? Is the illah the fact that they dropped the dowry? So they made one the dowry of another. Each one of them is the dowry of the other, and they dropped the dowries. Is that the illah? Or the illah is simply making one contract conditional for another? Huh? Yeah, so it is controversial in the Hanbali madhab. Imam Qudamah here considers the illah to be that the sadaq will be dropped, and that's the majority of Hanbalis, and that's the authorized position in the Hanbali madhab. But again, many Hanbalis, and that's the position I believe to be stronger, consider the very fact that they made one contract a condition for another enough to invalidate this marriage, whether or not they dropped the dowries. So even if they give dowry to each one of the two women, the marriage is still invalid because they made one marriage a condition for another. And the evil of this is quite obvious, and the fact that they always do this, like two brothers marry and two sisters, or two siblings, brother and sister, two couplets, brother and sister couplet, marrying a brother and sister couplet. And then one divorces and the other divorces also in retaliation, and it becomes like a mess. So that has to be, the two have to be separated from each other, everybody, if you want to marry, then you marry this alone. Forget about the other one. They may negotiate like a marriage later, but each marriage has to stand independent of the other. Independent of the other. No marriage can be a condition of another. Okay, so that's basically the swap marriage. Then the Sheikh said, وَلَعَنَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم الْمُحَلِّلَ وَالْمُحَلَّلَ لَهُ وهو أن يتزوج المطلقة ثلاثا ليحلها لمطلقها. The Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم cursed the muhallil, one who makes something permissible. He makes here the wife permissible, and the muhallal lahu, one for whom something is made permissible. This refers to when he marries a woman who was divorced 3 times to make her permissible for her ex-husband. So tahleel here, the issue with tahleel here, remember one of the things, remember Imam Taymiyyah rahmahullah died in jail because of his fatwa about the three divorces? Yeah, what is it? The composite divorce, the threefold composite divorce. When he made a fatwa that it would count as one, the reason why he made this fatwa is because people were making this pronouncement all the time, and then they would have like 7 or 8 kids, and then they want to go back together, and there's no way for them to go back together. So they would find someone to marry her, like for one night, and then they would resume and it used to be a mess. Why? Because this person who would marry her for one night, he would consummate it or not consummate it. If he does not consummate it, then they're deceiving Allah, because it doesn't count. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, لا حتى تذوقي عسيلته ويذوق عسيلتك. So the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you do not become halal for the first one until you have had intimacy. Each one of you enjoyed the other in intimacy. So if it is consummated, obviously it's a mess. Because you're getting married just to consummate the marriage and return her back to her first husband, but you consummate the marriage. So it's a mess, and if you don't consummate it, it's another mess, because you're deceiving Allah. It does not make her lawful for the first husband, because the intent of the Sharia to begin with was to say, you're not good for each other after you had 3 fallouts, and you divorce each other 3 times. Try a different life with a different man or woman. But then the composite threefold divorce is just like a one-time thing. You just say you're talaq bit-talata, and then she becomes forbidden forever. So that posed a huge problem for the Muslim ummah. That is a huge problem for the Muslim ummah. So he said that the Prophet ﷺ, during the time of the Prophet and during the time of Abu Bakr, that the 3 divorces used to count as one, until Umar radiallahu anhu enforced it on them, counting as 3, to punish them for their imprudence in making that pronouncement. And this hadith was reported by Abdullah ibn Abbas and so on. But this is basically the background of that particular incident. But tahleel had always been a problem for us. Let us figure out, the Prophet ﷺ called the muhallil at-tays al-musta'ar, the borrowed goat. Right? So the borrowed male goat, the muhallil, the one who makes the first wife permissible, because he's borrowed basically to mate with or to have intimacy with the wife for some time, so that he makes her permissible for the first one. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الْمُحَلِّلَ وَالْمُحَلَّلَ لَهُ. May Allah curse the muhallil who makes the wife permissible for the first one, وَالْمُحَلَّلْ لَهُ, and the husband also who is having. So that arrangement is a cursed arrangement, because the intent of the legislator was what? You're not good for each other. But what is intended here is what, as Tahir ibn Ashur says when he defends the fatwa of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says, and it was not only Ibn Taymiyyah, it's the Khushani for the Malikiyya and other Malikiyya, but no one defended it with sort of a detailed. Most of the time, these fatwa that are ascribed to a particular scholar, they're not that particular scholar's only, but they would be named after the scholar who defended them in detail. So not the person who just spoke of the fatwa, the person who defended it in detail. So when we say music is halal according to Ibn Hazm, well, you can't really just blame it on Ibn Hazm alone. There are other scholars, but because Ibn Hazm took the time to defend that position, it is basically blamed on him, ascribed to him, or blamed on him. The position of the 3 divorces, it's ascribed to Ibn Taymiyyah, although it's not his, only his, but he took the time to defend it in detail. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in the Quran, الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. And then Allah says فإن طلقها فلا تحل له من بعد حتى تنكح زوجا غيره فإن طلقها فلا جناح عليه. So it is a talaq after a raj'a, not talaq after talaq, because, or not talaqs that are combined. It is talaq, resuming of the marriage, divorcing, resuming, divorcing, resuming, divorcing, resuming. These are the 3 talaqs that Allah said after the 3rd, you guys are not good for each other. So to divorce, to return, divorce, take her back, divorce, take her back. What the Arab used to do in the Jahiliyyah sometimes to just torment women is that they used to divorce, take back, before her iddah ends. So divorce her, take her back before her iddah ends by 1 day. Divorce her the next day, take her back before her iddah ends by a few days. Divorce her, take her back. Keep her like this. So Allah said, no, you don't have that liberty. You have 3 divorces only. After the 3rd, she's not yours. She becomes ba'in. You can't return her. You can't take her back. You can't even take her back by a new contract, because you guys are not good for each other. So you'll have to get married to another person. Maybe to basically rescue her from her own intimidation, because people could be afraid of divorce. The women could be afraid of divorce. So her own intimidation, Allah is forcing her to try out a new life, and his own intimidation also, forcing them to try out a new life. Okay, so al-muhallil then, there are certain things that are agreed upon when it comes to al-muhallil, certain arrangements that are agreed upon. 1, it is invalid if you don't consummate the marriage, agreed upon. 2, it is also a cursed arrangement and invalid if it is written in the contract, if it is for compensation, if there is a person who's known to be a habitual muhallil. And there used to be those characters in the past. So in any of these 3 cases, this is an invalid arrangement. Now, let us say a person, none of these reservations exists. But someone, just out of the kindness of his heart, heard that a friend of his or a neighbor divorced his wife a 3rd time. And then after she ended her iddah, he proposed to her, intending to divorce her afterwards so that she may return to her first husband.
Doesn't stand.
Huh?
Doesn't stand. Right?
Doesn't stand. Well, it will stand according to the Hanafis and Shafi'is. And it will not stand according to the Malikis and Hanbalis. But it is standing according to the Hanafis and Shafi'is, because they said that there is no agreement, there is no plot. It's only him and him, there is no plot. They're saying that it is not for compensation, it is out of the kindness of his heart, he is not a habitual muhallil. So it's just that he intends to do this, and that does not invalidate the marriage according to them. So the Hanafis and Shafi'is said it is valid, and the Malikis and Hanbalis said it is not. So that's it. I mean, there is room for disagreement here, and I certainly uphold the Hanbali and Maliki position that it is not valid. But there is some room for disagreement here, given that all of the previous, given that there is no plot, no agreement, given that there is no compensation, and this is not done, and it's not being done for monetary gain or anything. And that he's not doing this all the time. So given those conditions, there is room for the Hanafis and Shafi'is to disagree here. And then what do we say? What do we do with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? Because the primary meaning or the zahir of this hadith, or the apparent meaning of this hadith, that he's cursing just a muhallil, the one who makes a woman halal for her first husband, and a muhallal lahu, the one for whom this arrangement is being made, the first husband himself. So does this apply to what the Hanafis and the Shafi'is say is permissible? Well, yes, according to the Hanbalis and Malikis it does, because he's still a muhallil. Maybe it does not apply to the husband because there is no plot and the husband does not know of his intention, but it will still apply to him because his intent is to marry, just to make her permissible for the first husband. So you could apply the word muhallil to him. The Hanafis and Shafi'is said no, it doesn't apply because there is no plot, and as long as there is no plot, it does not apply. So these are basically the conditions in marriage, and we divided them into three different types. There are conditions that are valid. You are recommended, or even according to some scholars required, to honor them. But if you don't honor them, the woman or the wife will be entitled to annulment or fasakh of the nikah. She can ask that she does not, that you don't take her away from her country, her town, or even her home, that you don't take another wife, that you let her go to work, that you let her go to school, to finish college, to do a master's, PhD, postdoctoral fellowship. And then then there are invalid ones that will invalidate the marriage. There are obvious ones that will invalidate the marriage: temporary marriage, swap marriage, and tahleel marriage. There are those invalid conditions in the contract that will be invalidated if they are disputed by one of the two parties. If they are not disputed, they can be mutually agreed upon perpetually. But if they are disputed, they will be invalidated. These are conditions like, we'll get married, but you, my wife, will spend on me, or we will get married, but you will not get your fair share of my time, or that we will get married and the wife will say, for instance, we'll get married, but there will be no intimacy on weekends or something, like anything of that nature. Then it will be invalidated, but the marriage will certainly stand, and the marriage will stand according to all. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك.